University-based research project entitled The Impact of Involvement on Overall Satisfaction. I'm Dylan.
I'm Fianna.
And I'm Venkat.
And we're going to go over exactly what we did in our research study. So let's move on to a review of the literature.
So there have been multiple research projects that look at the relationship between involvement and satisfaction. The first one we looked at was titled, Does Involvement Really Matter? Indicators of College Student Success and Satisfaction. This project looked at whether participation in academic activities contributed to student success, and this was measured through GPA. They also looked at differences in student success when you consider confounding factors such as gender, race, living status, and class level. This article is really good because it highlighted how quality of relationships, engagement in the community, and living on campus positively associated with one's GPA. However, engagement with diverse peers was negatively correlated. Also, students who felt that institutional emphasis on non-academic support was present were 2 to 3 times more satisfied, and students involved in community service were more likely to rate their overall educational experience as excellent. However, there are some limitations in the study, as the sample was voluntary and socioeconomic status was not addressed, but it's still a good indicator on how satisfaction is impacted by student involvement. Another research study that we looked at was titled Why Involvement Matters, a review of research on student involvement in the collegiate setting. There were 4 main ideas discussed in this article. The first being that historically colleges are much more concerned currently than they have ever been about student involvement on campus. The review also went deep into the importance of how involvement in opportunities are promoted and how once involved students have a tendency to have better retention in a university. Another aspect of college life discussed in the study was that many early involvement opportunities such as Greek life, student government, and orientation have a large impact on development and retention. These organizations help freshmen become better connected to the university and help to create a stronger sense of belonging and overall better retention. Finally, the review identified a large gap in the research studies that looked at student involvement in college. This is due to the fact that most of this research is done by student affairs, and they work under the assumption that involvement is always beneficial for students. This could potentially skew results, as it wasn't always looking for all the outcomes and had a predetermined outcome in mind when looking at the studies. So these studies are very good at looking at satisfaction and student involvement, but our study addresses some of the gaps. Because of the SSS that was created by NOVA, we will be able to examine which involvements on campus directly correlate with satisfaction and whether specific clubs or group activities have impacts on the most highly satisfied students. Also, we may be able to pinpoint which academic involvements are most beneficial to students. This means components such as experiential learning, first-year seminar, office hours, and teacher's assistants will have could have greater links to academic success and satisfaction. Some basic assumptions of demographic information have already been examined, so we will use this as a baseline to compare our results to see whether these findings are consistent, and if not, why.
So ultimately, our research purpose was to understand the relationship between college students' participation and their satisfaction with the university. Now, participation we split into 2 subgroups, which is their perceived participation or involvement and their actual participation. So perceived involvement means how involved someone believes they are, and actual is the actual number of clubs or events that they attended. We have several research questions. The first one is, does involvement correlate with overall satisfaction with the university? The second is there an ideal amount of involvement? So we hypothesize that there may be too much involvement or too little involvement. And in that case, there would be a bell curve. The other questions were, which clubs tend to have the highest satisfaction rates? How does enrollment in Razor's Edge affect satisfaction? Which will correlate with satisfaction more, perceived involvement or actual involvement? And lastly, do those who hold a position in the club have a higher satisfaction rate than general club members? Because your role, if you are, say, president or treasurer, is very different than just a general club member who attends meetings. So these are all the questions that we started out hoping to answer, but the ones highlighted in orange are the only ones that we were able to answer, and we're going to go into why later. So our participants, our methods were already collected for us. We used archival data, and we used two things. So we used the NESI and SSS and REP, which I will go into later, but for now I'm just going to talk about the participants in each one. For SSS and REP, there was 91 individuals at NSU who took both the SSS and had data on REP. And those 91 individuals were first-year students comprised of individuals aged 16 to 59. So it's a pretty big range, but majority were 18, and the second highest were 17 and 19-year-olds. There was just a couple outliers. Now, the NESI, there was 281 people that were analyzed in this correlational study, ages 16 to 65. Freshmen and seniors took this survey, and 281 individuals of this were put into composite variables. So as mentioned, for our methods, which were archival data, we used the NESI, which is the National Survey of Student Engagement, the Raiser's Edge Engagement Profile, which is basically a count of the number of events that someone went to. So when they go to these events, their shark card is swiped, and so it was a very good quantitative way to measure actual participation. And the Student Success Survey, which was administered by NOVA. A little bit more about the NESI. It is from Indiana University Center for Post-Secondary Research. The NESI has shown to be statistically significant by comparison to other tests. Here we linked a study. It assesses critical thinking, moral development, general learning, and personal well-being. It's a very well-known test, and it's used in many schools. So since we were using archival data, it wasn't necessarily tailored towards our questions. So our methods would really involve taking this data and sorting through what we had, the answers that we had, and trying to answer our questions with it. So the first way to test actual involvement versus satisfaction. For involvement, we used the REP, which is again those shark card swipes. And for satisfaction, we modified the NESI, and those are the questions that we used. Those were the only questions. The second way to test involvement versus satisfaction, for both components, we use the NESI. So for involvement, again, those are the questions that we used, and for satisfaction, those are the questions that we used. Now you can see for involvement questions, we highlighted in red, hold a former leadership role in a student organization or group. That's because that question we tested separately.
Okay, so the procedure that we used was basically all archival data. So all the surveys were administered through Nova Southeastern University, and the REP data, or the Raiser's Engagement Profiles, were also collected through NSU as well. Then Dr. Spiegel de-identified the data, and it was given to us, the researchers. So basically he just gave every participant a number ID rather than their name and or their major, just to make sure that we weren't able to identify any of the people there. We then omitted duplicates, we sorted through that data, and then we went through the different questions that we thought were going to answer our specific questions. We then computed composite variables, determined their z-scores to standardize everything, and then we took the mean z-scores of all that data. And then we correlated those variables to each other. So we correlated the number of organizations people were in, the number of events people went to, their mean involvement based off of those composite variables and their mean satisfaction based off of those composite variables as well. Okay, so here are our results. We first compared the REP, which shows us the actual involvement in forms of number of organizations students are in and number of events they attend, and the SSS, which is a composite score of their satisfaction. We also used the NESI to figure out a composite perceived involvement as well, which is that first thing that you see on our table right there. So, first off, the SSS did not provide us with any information regarding involvement. There was one question on that did ask how many clubs students were involved in, but there was no recorded responses. Therefore, we could not use SSS to compare any of these regarding actual involvement. So we had to use the REP versus the SSS to see that. So as you can see, there was no correlation between events and organizations. There was a correlation between events and organizations, as you can see here, which makes sense. If you're in more organizations, you're most likely going to attend more events, at least on the merit that you're going to at least attend your organization's events. There was no correlation between the mean satisfaction composite variable and orgs and events, so this means, however, there was a correlation between involvement and satisfaction. So basically our mean involvement score and our mean satisfaction score did have some correlation, which means students that feel like they are involved are more likely satisfied according to this. But this was deemed invalid due to the questions that we used in the composite variable, not necessarily because of the comparison itself. And this was our results according to the NESI itself. So this includes our mean involvement, perceived involvement, composite variable, and our mean satisfaction composite variable. And according to this survey, there is a correlation between overall satisfaction and mean involvement. Also, the mean overall satisfaction and mean satisfaction had a relationship as well. And also those who were leaders in organizations are generally more involved as a whole, which makes sense. So you can see the Z-score for just the leader question right here. You can see there is a correlation with their general involvement as well. Not necessarily their satisfaction, but overall, which makes sense. Leaders of organizations are going to be a lot more involved than non-leaders. So, addressing our research questions. The first research question that we were able to answer was, does involvement correlate with overall satisfaction with the university? The NESI showed that there is a significant correlation between mean satisfaction overall and mean involvement. So this means their overall satisfaction and their perceived involvement means that if people feel like they're involved on campus, then they're most likely going to be more satisfied with the university. Now, for those who hold a club, that we were also able to answer the question, do those who hold a position in club have a higher satisfaction rate than general club members? And from analyzing the NESI, it can be seen that there is a correlation between holding a leadership position and overall involvement. However, there is not a correlation present between holding a leadership position and overall satisfaction. So not necessarily are they going to be more satisfied in the university, but they're going to be more involved in the university, which, as we saw above, does lead to higher mean satisfaction.
So our question may seem very simple and straightforward. What effect does involvement have on satisfaction? But it actually has a lot of relevance. So like many other colleges, Nova Southeast University spends a lot of money to make sure that there's a sense of community and school involvement in student life. And we want to test if there actually is a statistical evidence to prove this. The other relevance is to determine if there was a return on investment, so to speak, and has NSU been successful with making involvement count?
While this project was really well-rounded, there were a couple of flaws in our study. first main one being that in our project we didn't have data to look at whether perceived involvement had an actual effect on satisfaction. So we thought we had a lot more data than we actually had, but when we actually analyzed the data, there seemed to be a lot of gaps. So in the future, when if we were to redo this study or to improve upon it, we would try and look to fill in these gaps in the data and get a larger sample size and more diverse sample size to better inform the data that we have on the subject.
Here are our works cited for our various literature reviews. And if you have any questions, please post them down in the discussion.